Welcome to BizTech's Jobs and Careers show. Today we speak to Benjamin Croc, the co-founder and CEO of BrioHR. BrioHR is an all-in-one, affordable, modular, and simple cloud-based HR management software. Now, to tell us more, Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian, for the intro. Thank you for having me on the show.
Now, Ben, give us an overview of BrioHR and your history.
Yeah, so BrioHR was established out of Malaysia a few years back in 2018. So the idea behind BrioHR is really to provide SMEs in Malaysia and beyond with a single platform that would combine all HR processes in a modern and agile way. So really combining not only the depth in terms of the functionalities, but also in terms of the interface so that users, HR, employees can really feel like they are using their day-to-day apps. And we felt at the time that there was still a huge gap to fill in Malaysia and Southeast Asia in terms of this kind of platform in order to help SMEs, again, grow, be more and more agile and more efficient in the way they run businesses and HR.
That's been your McKinsey and Company former life, where you use your consultant hat and basically saw the opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, the working at McKinsey and in my previous experiences as well, I was exposed to many different work environments, to many different HR teams, to many different industries and geographies. And all the way, it was coming back to one constant is how can we be more efficient in terms of knowing our people, managing our people from the pure HR standpoint. And there was an apparent lack of the right tools in order to do that efficiently. So definitely there was a link in terms of the way I looked at this and considered that it was something I wanted to play a role in solving.
Okay, so it's 2018 that you started. We're now in 2022. What does your geographical footprint look like and what does your customer base look like?
So today we are still mostly geared towards Malaysia and Southeast Asia because it's our base. And what's interesting as well is that having started at the end of 2018, most of the company life has been under a pandemic, a crisis. So it was also an interesting element. Yet this was also an opportunity to make sure we could expand internationally with limited possibilities to meet in person, to travel, and so on. So today, right out of Malaysia, where we still have the bulk of the team, we cover more than 15 countries. So we have clients in all continents with an emphasis again on Southeast Asia, where Malaysia, Singapore, and a few other countries are our focus in terms of also providing payroll services, which are also very localized. So beyond having a platform that is usable in pretty much every country in the world, we provide very localized modules, payroll, which helps companies in those markets to go even further in terms of their HR digitization and integration. Today, we have a few hundreds companies using BrioHR, and they range from 10 employees to the few thousands to the low thousands of employees. They span across many industries as well, like it could be manufacturing, tech, services. So that's really a testimony of the, I would say, upfront investment that we put in the platform at the beginning to make it flexible enough, but also, again, a consequence of the pandemic, which forced us to operate remotely for the most part.
Okay, since you operate out of Malaysia primarily, let's do a peer comparison within Malaysia as well as globally. Now, how are you different from the likes of, say, kakitangan.com in Malaysia, many of the legacy platform providers in Malaysia, as well as global solutions like Zoho, or perhaps even slightly larger solutions like Workday? What's your sweet spot?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a great question, and of course, an important question when it's an established industry like this. So I will start by the latter two that you mentioned. So, for example, Workday, SAP, those are really the biggest one in the worldwide market. They are huge companies worth many billions of dollars with many millions of clients and so on. And actually, Workday, SAP, Oracle, they are geared towards huge companies, right? Multinationals with thousands of employees across many countries and so on. And in fact, for those people who know those softwares, I'm not afraid to say that what we want to do is actually bring Workday, Oracle, SAP quality and breadth of functionalities to SMEs, which require also making it more affordable, more flexible in a way to go through different stages of maturity, of growth, and so on. If now we talk about Zoho, as you mentioned, Zoho, Zoho is the example of a very generalist HR, geographically speaking, meaning that Zoho will not necessarily go as deep as what we aim at going in terms of BrioHR platform, but also Zoho will not do payroll, for instance, which is once again extremely localized, extremely difficult, but what we have managed to do for Malaysia, Singapore, and soon more geographies. Finally, if we go more local to, for example, Kakitangan or similar players, as you mentioned, legacy players, the main word here actually is what you mentioned is legacy. So what we bring to Malaysia, which is different from most, is a combination of the well-rounded HR processes, so going beyond HR administration, which is the bulk of the softwares in the region and in the world, including, for example, those you mentioned, but also with a more modern touch, very flexible, very innovative, constant innovation, actually. So the software will never be done per se. We always add more and more things to it. Adding to that, the trend that pushes companies to go from server-based environments to more cloud-based apps, more agility again in their processes, is the combination of those three aspects that makes BrioHR very unique, and also why some companies, modern, growing, established, chose BrioHR, whereas they were using one of those softwares before. So
yeah, and I think that's the Ben, I think that's the big opportunity, isn't it? Because especially because of the pandemic, companies had to manage differently, especially diversified workforce. So you couldn't have, if you had a client server application for your HR software, suddenly your workers are all working remote. They can't go and check stuff. They've got to be in the office to check stuff. So obviously going on the cloud is the right way for them. And therefore you're riding the wave.
Yeah, exactly. And there was this shock at the beginning of the pandemic. And there was even some articles, saying, and some laws actually enforced in order to allow HR practitioners to go to the office to process payroll exceptionally, even though there was a national lockdown. So clearly there is this huge shift that is happening, and we want to help companies embrace it in the easiest and smoothest way possible, for sure.
And how else has the pandemic impacted the HR industry in the last 2 years?
I think it has really, of course, had a huge impact, as you can imagine. For me, I would say there would be maybe 3 main areas where there is change and potentially lasting change. So the first one is, of course, the need for more agility and therefore more visibility on the company information, on the company data, remotely again, as you rightly pointed out. So there definitely this acceleration of the digitization, cloud adoption, the communication was even more key than before. And this actually is a muscle that we realized we had not built as much as needed, because it was always, yeah, communication is important. Of course, this was not new, but having it done digitally, remotely, more intensely in a way, because we all know that even on the personal aspects, working remotely from home by ourselves and so on created some challenges in terms of being isolated and so on. So I think there was a normal transition to digital that suddenly became a very high impact and high urgency situation. The second one, and this one I like this change very much. So the first one was kind of a forced one that happened because it happened, but this one for me is really amazing. I could feel, and I talked to hundreds of HR professionals, HR directors, managers, also to hundreds of CEOs all this while. And I could see, I could witness, and I could observe that the HR role became more central than ever. HR went from processing payroll, I'm exaggerating a bit, to basically being at the center of every preoccupation. How can we organize the work? How can we organize the office? Which procedures do we put in place to be compliant with the SOPs? How do we make sure we retain our employees? How do we make sure that in case we have the difficult choice to lay off some employees, we keep those employees, we take care of those employees that we might have to lay off to really make sure that they can stay inserted and stay employed anywhere. So it was really a huge shift that I could see that from an execution play, HR really played the role that I feel should be the permanent role of HR, and I feel about this since forever, to a very strategic role, very close to the company top management. And this, I think, and I hope that it will last way beyond the crisis.
And Ben, I agree with you completely on that, because HR, and I've always shared that view as you did, needs to be the fundamental building block of the organization, not a peripheral, as in many organizations where the HR is still reporting to the CFO. You know, so I mean, you smile because you see that all the time, but really it should be part of the senior management. Of course, in large companies, you see that. When in SMEs, HR in the past has been relegated, really, as you said, to processing payroll and very administrative type tasks. Now, looking ahead now, what are the biggest changes that you've seen in terms of the challenges that employers are facing? What are the burning issues right now?
I think right now, the big, I would say, challenge will revolve around what some would refer to as the future of work, except that the future of work is now. So the future of work, of course, has components such as remote work, digital work, and so on, which we've just talked about a bit. But at the center of this all, there are employees who are also humans. And this whole pandemic created a kind of a collective self-reflection process. And many people really started to question, what do I want in my life? I don't want my job to dictate my life. I want my job to be a genuine component that I like, that I need of my life. And to me, companies today are faced with a very new environment in that aspect, where employees' expectations have evolved in terms of work-life balance, have evolved in terms of working environment, have evolved in terms of the tools they have to accomplish their job, rather than feeling, you know, they don't do super value-added tasks. More and more, really emphasis and put the emphasis on purpose. So I think now, with employees much more proactive in terms of voicing out what they want and so on, companies will have to constantly keep an eye out, keep an ear out as well, in order to understand, to observe what is important to attract the right employees, but of course to then engage them and keep them so that they can perform, for in turn the company to perform. To me, it's really about managing the new mindset of the general workforce, I would say.
But so here's the interesting thing, Ben. What you are alluding to, of course, is the fact that essentially we will probably go to more of a hybrid work model, as opposed to the Elon Musk work model of everyone return to work. Do you see that being pervasive in terms of the hybrid work model? Or do you think that in some markets, you will see that return to the office?
I'm personally a big proponent of the hybrid model. I think what Elon Musk recently shared surprised many people, not necessarily surprising coming from him, because he has usually very strong stances and so on, but surprised, of course, people in terms of the trend that we have seen over the past 2 years, which goes kind of the opposite. Clearly, I think it will be hard and potentially will be not a good thing to try to force everyone back to the office. One simple reason is that employees, again, will have the choice. There are so many hybrid organizations now and so on, that people, having been used to becoming more hybrid, to spend part of their work time at home, will definitely want to keep some part of that in the future. I'm curious to see what happens at Tesla in the coming few weeks and months on that aspect. So definitely I feel that the hybrid work is here to stay. Then which model exactly, there is always a debate about number of days, what should happen exactly, and so on. This has yet, I think, to fall into place as we move to a post, I would say, a pandemic, or at least past the peak, we all hope, of the pandemic.
Now, BrioHR, you run quite a number of surveys. You do it quite regularly on LinkedIn. I've seen that before. You've recently released a BrioHR SME Employment Index survey. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and what some of the key takeaways have been?
Sure, and that's very important to us, because since day one, our intent when creating BrioHR was not to be, I would say, an IT provider. It was never to be only a software in a way. It was really to play a role in the HR community in Malaysia, Southeast Asia, and beyond. So this SME Employment Index that we have released is really one of the initiatives we took in order to really play a role and try to help move this community forward with as many insights that we can collect and share. So we also do a podcast, we do a lot of thought pieces and so on. But in terms of the SME Employment Index, the aim is really to, I would say, support companies and SMEs in the region by giving them access to the right benchmark of companies like them, which have been through a crisis like them as well. And therefore, it's always interesting, I think, to see and to gauge what we can do when we see what is happening in the wider environment and so on. So the idea behind the Employment Index was really to aggregate information and data that we can have because of our unique exposition to so many companies, and share it in the most palatable way, actionable way, to the wider SME environment. For instance,
I was just going to ask you that. What are the specifics that somebody, an SME can use, or SME leader can use from your survey?
For instance, I will give you an example. We could see that salaries have increased by a little over 1% from the last quarter of 2021 to the first quarter of 2022. While 1% can seem maybe not that high, we are talking about the general environment, and there are still companies impacted and so on, which shows that there is some kind of trust, some kind of confidence that is being recovered after 2 years of very difficult time. Another very interesting insight is that the jobs, the employment environment, so there was 5% more jobs created in Q1 2022 versus Q4 2021, which followed the 4% increase in the previous quarter. So once again, having those kind of strong numbers a few quarters in a row, and we will see what we see over the next quarters because we want to keep it a quarterly study for now. It's important to say, okay, shall I feel that the crisis is over, but shall I invest? Shall I hire? And by seeing what others are doing in the wider economy and so on, can help people say, okay, let's start investing again, because we still have opportunities to harness. We still have recovery to potentially make happen. So that's the kind of insights that allows to give confidence, give a pulse of the wider SME economy and environment.
Now, Ben, however, this is against the backdrop of a global picture that is worsening dramatically. You have the threat of stagflation. You have obviously a war in Ukraine. You've got basically prices rising, and therefore at every level pressure to increase salaries. But at the same time, job cuts are starting to happen across different industries, particularly starting already even in a very strong economy like the US. What's your view on the job front in Malaysia as well as the greater ASEAN region?
Yeah, that's so crucial what you mentioned, and it's so special, in fact, in history. First, the pandemic is, I mean, at least for our generations, is something we never experienced. And as soon as we get out of it, new huge issues potentially, or at least circumstances happens. So of course, you mentioned them, the war in Ukraine, inflation, and the supply chain disruptions on. So definitely it doesn't make it easy to understand what will be the net effect, the net impact of all this. Having said that, from, again, my observations, talking to company leaders and so on, is that Southeast Asia so far and Malaysia has for now been a bit shielded from some consequences that we have seen in the US and in Europe. And it's not necessarily a given that those consequences will, reach and be as strong as they are in the US and Europe in, again, the Southeast Asian region. So although it's very difficult to say, I personally remain fairly optimistic about this, and what our SME Employment Index and other surveys that we regularly run, or the discussions we have with key players in the sector, I still am optimistic about the fact that it will be a net recovery from the pandemic times, yet maybe not as great as what we would have been able to achieve if there was not all this difficult macroeconomical environment, for sure.
Now, so against this, Ben, you've just raised your next round of funding, which brings your total raise to 1.3 million. And along that journey, that includes startup mentoring and incubation with Y Combinator out of the US. Tell us what your plans are for 2022, 2023.
The plans for 2022, 2023 is really to capitalize, I would say, on everything we have built so far in terms of the platform, of course, that we've built that is fairly unique, but also the connections and the brand and the presence that we have established in the markets. So from a time of huge investment in terms of our platform and positioning, now we want to push a bit further in order to serve more and more companies across, again, Malaysia, and quickly internationalize even further in the region. So the plan for 2022, 2023 is really to grow, for sure, to grow as fast as we can, yet to keep it, and it's linked to your previous point as well, to keep it very healthy. We have always been extremely conscious about what kind of growth we wanted to have, and this will definitely not change, even though we are at a stage where we can accelerate further the growth on the back of a very strong platform, very strong client support, and very strong initiatives that are in the pipe for the coming few years.
Ben, thank you very much for your insights, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much, Brian. It was a pleasure.
Now, I'm Brian Fernandez, and we've been speaking to Benjamin Croc, the co-founder and CEO of BrioHR, on BizTech's Jobs and Careers show. This video and podcast will be on our various social media platforms, as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. Please like and subscribe to our various platforms. Thanks again for tuning in.